Da-da-da-da-da.
Welcome. Hello, everybody. So, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about me before I begin, so you'll have some understanding of where I started and how I ended up to be doing these crazy things. I've been a photographer for the last 30 years. I started making pictures in art school. I was a fine arts major at the School of Visual Arts, and I liked photography so much that I transferred to the photography department, and I graduated with a BFA from SVA in photography. I've worked in the field since my graduation from the School of Visual Arts. And my first job out of school was working for Sotheby's. I think you might have heard of them. They're a big auction house. And I had a job photographing all of their artwork and working in their darkroom, which I preferred to photographing their artwork. And then I went on to continue my professional career in printing, in fine art black and white printing, which I laugh at now because I wonder if there is such a career left in fine art black and white printing. But anyway, I worked at a photo lab where we made prints for people like Mary Ellen Mark and Bruce Davidson and people who were part of the Magnum Photo Agency. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but it's this pretty big time photo agency in New York. So that's what I started doing. I went to graduate school kind of late. I didn't go till I was about 30 years old. I had already had a baby, and I was a lot older than a lot of the other students in the class. And I started teaching at NYU immediately following my graduation from the NYU ICP program. I was an adjunct on and off at NYU for over 17 years. Paula said I work there. I don't work there any longer. Now I only teach at the International Center for Photography in Manhattan, and I teach workshops on wet plate collodion, which is the technique I work in today. More recently, since 1999, is when I started learning the wet plate process. I went upstate to this home or homestead of a man named John Coffer. He lives a 19th century lifestyle. He built his own cabin, he has his own outhouse, he has a farm, and he lives there without any electricity. And he hauls his water from his well, and he works in this 19th century process. So that's kind of an interesting way to spend the weekend with John Coffer. One other thing I'll be doing come next fall, I'll be teaching at the Telluride Photo Festival. It's a photo festival for outdoor photography, and I've been claimed by the outdoor photographers now, which I didn't know I was a part of. So that's kind of cool. I'm going to Telluride, and I'll be teaching workshops in wet plate collodion. So, welcome to Surfland. How is that? Is it kind of dark? Yeah? Is there anything we can do about that?
Only under the Apple, maybe brightness.
On the screen?
If you go to Apple System Preferences, Display.
Move on to projector.
You might be all the way up.
What do y'all suggest? Are they unbearably dark to you? No. Okay, then I'll leave it. I won't be particular after all this. So Surfland. Surfland is a name that I came up with while searching for an exhibition title. And I was looking for a name that embodied, the idea of surf, but also it placed it in a landscape that was somewhat mythical and somewhat real. I was looking for something kind of iconic, I suppose, and I wanted it to sound as real as a place like Finland or Lapland or even like Hollywood. So that's how I came up with that name. But what I didn't know at the time was that Surfland really does exist, and that the people in my pictures are the inhabitants of this temporal land. The photographs in the series Surfland are one-of-a-kind tintype portraits that I've been working on for the last 4 years. I'll be telling you about how it started, where it's evolved to today, and Also a bit about the process and how that integrates with my imagery and why I think it's such a good match, both conceptually and visually. My tin types are one-of-a-kind positives, and they're sized at 8 by 10 and 14 by 17. They're all shot on the east and west coast of the United States. And because it's an historic process, better associated with Civil War photography than surfing, I thought I would tell you a little bit more about it and what it's about. So let's start with what goes into my making a tin type. Collodion is a wet process that, as I said before, was popular between 1850 and 1870. And it's a chemical. It's a clear, syrupy liquid composed of gun cotton and ether, which are explosive. And you combine it with iodides and bromides, and it's a photographic emulsion. It can be poured on clear glass to make a negative. It can be poured on black glass to make an ambrotype, or it can be poured on blackened metal to make a tin type, which is what I do. And because it's a wet plate process, it has to be hand applied and developed, exposed, all during a short period of time so that the chemistry does not dry. Thus its name, wet plate. So therefore, all my photographs, start to finish, are made on location because all the process work is done in the field. And I see my pictures instantaneously, as do my subjects. And this is an interesting and key factor in my work. Having my subjects see their image right after it's processed factors into their participation into the project, and it's actually a tool that helps me to connect with them and for them to connect with me. They can decide immediately how they feel about the image. They can decide if they like it, if they would like me to redo it, and they also get really excited about it, providing they like it. This process, which you could also think of as 19th century Polaroid, and this way of working quickly became very integral into my entire process and making these portraits of surfers. One of the things I'm trying to do with using the medium of collodion is to place it as a valid contemporary tool. I relate to it as a choice in photographic medium the same way that large format photographers make that choice over 35mm photographers, and the same way that digital photographers make that same choice over film photographers, or vice versa. It's just yet another choice. And so typical photographic practices like meter readings are completely useless because collodion is sensitive only to ultraviolet light, and that can't be read by light meter. The speed of collodion is slow, and it's been estimated to have an ISO of about -25. So that means that all of my exposures are kind of long in comparison to our quick world that we live in. A typical shutter speed for me is somewhere between 1 and 3 seconds, and on a good day, maybe a half a second. And so in most outdoor/sports photography, what do you think the shutter speed might be? Kind of fast to capture action. So that's not something that this process does. So your exposures are long, and just how long depends on your chemistry, it depends on your lens, and it depends on the amount of ultraviolet light in the atmosphere. It also has really different characteristics than traditional film, which I love. It's nearly grainless, which I'm not sure you can tell by these particular slides, but it really doesn't have any grain. And it also has this beautiful creamy effect. It's a chemical, so it's quirky, it's unpredictable, and that gives it all these special effects that you just don't know are going to happen. It also lends an element of surprise to each image. So, collodion has specific, I don't think you're going to be able to see this so well, color sensitivities and insensitivities, and this is a color slide of fabrics and materials. And so if you look at this slide and you compare it, let's say, to this pink one on the second one from the left, and compare it now to this collodion version of it, you can see the way collodion translates color. If you look on the top right, they just look like black and white pictures. But if we go back, you can see one is yellow and black, and one is blue and black. So all those things change the way your picture looks. The color blue, which collodion is extremely sensitive to, renders the sky as like almost completely white. It blows it out. And the color yellow, which it's insensitive to, shows up as black. So if you were taking a picture of a cornfield in a green pasture against a white sky, you would have black on white, and you wouldn't really have a picture. So, unless you overexposed it. Collodion also has distinct limitations. So it doesn't interpret film the way typical black and white film does, and it reveals things beneath the surface of the skin, such as freckles that you just can't see with the naked eye. And so it appears to have this ability to see the unseen, which makes it really kind of mystical. Chance, accident, spontaneity, tide, wind, weather. Those are the things that go into my picture making process. Because all of my work takes place outdoors and the process is wet, it's both weather and time sensitive. Because I can fix my plates in daylight, the people I photograph often watch the image as it appears, and that engages them. And that makes the whole idea of photographing and being photographed really exciting. All this is part of my interaction and experience of photographing surfers and making a tintype. And also, because it's on location, I get to meet and connect with really interesting, strange, and sometimes very weird people. And working in public is a kind of performance, which I wasn't really aware that I was getting involved in. It leaves one open to all kinds of things. And my making pictures has been the subject of other people's pictures. People are not afraid to engage with me. And while that helps attract sitters, it can also be incredibly distracting. There's questions about me in my dark box. What am I doing? Am I testing the water? Is my dark box a hot dog stand? Am I selling cappuccino? And the best one is, what time does the puppet show start? So, photographing surfers evolved out of two landscape projects that I'd been working on at Ditch Plains in Montauk, New York. I revisited the same environment year after year, working on these two bodies of work. And the first series that brought me to the bluffs of Ditch Plains was a series called Ocean Details. This was also my first attempt at landscape photography. Before that, I hadn't done any landscape photography. The pictures are large format, black and white, close-up details of the ocean surface. I printed them with platinum palladium because I wanted a very handmade and 19th century kind of feel to the photographs. That's contrasting. The image in real life is much softer. I was also interested in an emotional interpretation of the sea, and I was inspired more by drawings and paintings that I had seen of the ocean, and I was interested in the feelings that I got from those images. So that's part of the reason I decided to contact print them with platinum palladium. It gave the work a very tactile and handmade look. And it kept them small, which made them feel more intimate. I worked with 5x7 negatives and 4x5 negatives. The Sea Sky series followed, and arranging the frame with a minimal amount of water and mostly sky was a way to stay close to this particular landscape, but change it up a bit and bring in something new. These are printed differently. These are large format prints. They're 40 by 50 gelatin silver prints. So you might ask, why surfers? Well, I like to say because they came to me. If you photograph the ocean at Ditch Plains, surfers were an inevitable part of the landscape there. I could not be there without surfers eventually finding their way into my frame. At first, I tried desperately to get rid of them. I know how to whistle. I would give them a big loud whistle out there on the ocean and motion them to move, like the director in the set. Eventually, I decided to, I don't know if you can see in this picture here because it's so dark, but at the very bottom are surfers there. And this is the first landscape picture I took that incorporated surfers in it. Can you guys see that? Not really? A little bit. I apologize for that. So initially, obviously, I considered these surfers interlopers into my beautiful, pristine landscape, and I wasn't interested in them. Then, after a few years, I began to see that this was a place we were all interacting in. We're all here, and that it was this shared environment, and that it was important to pay attention to that. These people were inhabiting the landscape, and maybe they were there for a reason. So, in this particular image, the surfers give a sense of scale and importance to the landscape. And at first, it's hard to tell if there are fish out there on the ocean or if they're humans. And it's precisely this comparison and this confusion that my portraits hope to address. For me now, surfers are primal. They're so much a part of the landscape at Ditch Plains that I'm surprised I avoided them for so long. And maybe more importantly is that what I'm trying to do just by photographing surfers fits so well with what they do just by being surfers. I'm not sure if all landscape photographers feel this way, but when I was photographing landscapes, I was not interested in having conversations with people. This is my first intentional surfer portrait. It's shot from the same bluffs that the previous photograph was shot. It's shot like a landscape, it's horizontal. The person is very small in the frame. I was using the same kind of, I guess, thought process. And this image also was the first image that spurred me on to coming down to the beach and actually photographing the surfers on the beach. I didn't realize when I first started making these pictures, but it's pretty obvious to me now that my photographs embrace the idea of chance. They're not about control. Each time I went to the beach to photograph, I had no idea if there were going to be any surfers there. I didn't know if there would be any surf. I didn't know what the weather would be like, what the tide would be like. I really just went down there and hung out and hoped that my setup and my camera would arouse some form of conversation. So that made the experience of meeting and finding subjects one of the most interesting aspects of the whole project, and it really still is. At first, I began, as I said, just by hanging out and setting up the camera in the dark box and hoping for something to happen. It was a very low-key approach. And eventually, actually I should go back, Brett came over toting his digital camera, and he asked me about my large wooden 8x10 camera. And I explained a bit about it and that this was a 19th century process, and I was working on a series of surfer portraits, and he was a surfer, and so I asked him if he would be interested in posing, and he agreed. So we stepped into the water, and he said, "What would you like me to do?" And I told him to hold the board in some way or fashion that he immediately got annoyed with me about. He bluntly told me right then and there, "Surfers do not hold their boards that way, lady." So he proceeded to instruct me on how to photograph a surfer. And so this is the second picture I made, and thanks to Brett, he showed me how to take a photograph of surfers. He also, after I processed the plate and he looked at it, immediately following the shoot, he invited me over to his beach blanket, which was set up under an umbrella, where he had his digital camera connected to his computer, and he said, "Look, I can process my pictures instantly too." So it was a funny kind of dichotomy there. So letting the subject guide the photograph was something that I learned that day, right on the spot, and that was the picture of how Brett was comfortable for his 3-second exposure. So by this time, I imagine you know that I'm not a surfer. I came to the subject and the whole project as an outsider, and I didn't know the first thing about surfing, or surfers for that matter. And I think it's an important distinction. I don't think you always have to be a part of something to learn about it and to sort of find your way into something. I arrived at this project with a sense of discovery, and also I didn't have any preconceived ideas about what surfing was because I didn't know. I mean, I've seen pictures, but I didn't really have an idea. So because surfing was not this known quotient, it enabled me to think really freely about the subject. And not knowing, I think it allowed me to explore the subject with a certain amount of freedom I might not have found or had I been a surfer. And as this series developed, I began to see this subculture of surfers as people who were both coming out of and returning to the sea at the same time. And I thought of it as evolution as a reversed course. If you choose to look at these images from an anthropological point of view, the people in the portrait seem to be at some point that is both primitive and contemporary. The surfboards are like symbols or totems revealing the individual's character, and their suits and their clothing are another descriptive symbol revealing place, time, fashion. And because my photographs are positives, it means that all of the text reads backwards. And so therefore, when you look at these pictures and you read the text, they're not these glaring logos, they're just some kind of icon or hieroglyphic. And I think that that works in its favor. Cultural anthropology studies is one field of anthropology that examines culture as a meaningful scientific concept. And I decided to look up cultural anthropology in Wikipedia. And what they say is, cultural anthropologists study cultural variation among humans. They collect observations. And usually through participant observation called fieldwork, they examine the impact of global economic and political processes on local cultural realities. I like that, local cultural realities. I felt that I found a local cultural reality. And as an artist and photographer, I connect with this idea, and I recognize my actions as being somewhat akin to fieldwork. And I've revisited the same location repeatedly. I've arrived with my requisite gear, I've watched, I've waited, and then I've interacted. So, this is Mike and Buster, making practical decisions about how to deal with taking people's pictures and having them want a copy of it happened early on, and happened actually quite organically. This is a photograph of Mike and his dog Buster, and he watched me at work on the beach and asked if I would make a tintype of him that he could buy. And this was early on to my project, and I really wasn't trying to sell my work, I was trying to get subjects. And so, in response, I made a deal to scan the plate and to provide him with a digital printout of his image for free. And this became a standard practice for all the surfers, and it solidified the fact that I was out there to make the photograph and not to make the bucks. There actually are a lot of photographers out there on the beach photographing all the surfers and then trying to sell them their photograph. Mine wasn't of that nature. I felt that it was important to stress the collaborative nature of my project, that I wanted to work with these people. So, the beach at Montauk can be filled with lots of everyday people and then sometimes more famous ones. And this happens to be a famous guy. This is Jimmy Buffett. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of him, Mr. Margaritaville. Yep, he's wasting away right out there surfing. So, it turns out that Mike was Jimmy Buffett's manager. He introduced us. I got a photo of Jimmy, which I had to sign a release for. I was not allowed to use it just anywhere. I had to get permission. So, anyway, my practice of giving away prints for free and allowing people to use their photographs that I made of them has had some interesting results. I give people permission to use their picture on Facebook as their profile picture and to use it for any kind of way they want that's non-commercial, where they're not selling the image on MySpace, stuff like that. But then, other people take liberties with the pictures that I take of them, especially during the holidays. That's a picture of a turkey on his surfboard. Photoshop is good for something. I swear it is. That was a Thanksgiving picture that Mick made. I found him out on the internet. Yeah. Mick Turkey, we call it. His name is Mick. It's cute. I thought it was erotic. I mean, it was totally a manipulation of my photograph, but it wasn't used for any other purpose than to have fun. And yeah, maybe I shouldn't have been upset. Oh, okay with it. Maybe I should have been upset, but I wasn't. And it's provided me with a few laughs during a slide lecture, right? So it was really worth something. So as time went on, I began to learn more about surfboards and what went into the whole art of making a surfboard. And then it became an attraction and motivation to photograph unto itself, aside from the people. I discovered that surfboard shapers were just as important than legendary surfers. And having a board by a well-known shaper was a testament to your taste and your ability. And shapers are also regional, which means that there are shapers everywhere, and people in certain locations pretty much like to buy from shapers who are local. Tandem boards were especially fascinating. This is a tandem board, which I couldn't believe it. I saw this board out in the water and asked a couple of surfers, whose board is that? And they said, I don't know, you want me to paddle out and find out? And he did, and brought them back. So that's a pretty long board. They both go on it at the same time. There's a couple of kids, Minnie and Lulu, with their tandem board. And this is what tandem partners do. I took these off the internet. Can you believe it? That is pretty outrageous. And here's another tandem couple in California, striking a pose. And another one where the symbol, the little flower, is placed in a specific spot, so when they reach a certain point in the wave, Toby, the guy on the right, says to Bettina, the girl on the left, go to the flower! And then they're balanced perfectly. So, most people I photograph only once, and I make only one picture of them. But some people, because I return to the same beach year after year, I've made pictures of them over a period of time. So this is a girl, Nika, and in the top left, that's her in 2006, 2007, and 2008. This is her brother, Evan, in 2006 and 2007. And I think at some point, returning to the same location, over a period of years has brought a lot of familiarity, which has gained me some entrance into making pictures I couldn't have made by just showing up for, let's say, 1 year. It's also brought a certain amount of acceptance to my being there. I'm just like another fixture on the beach. And it's also brought kind of a small amount of popularity amongst surfers, that is. And I think at this point, most people at Ditch think of me as part of their community. I get invited to the Surfer Gal dinners and, I seem to know everybody kind of well. So, California. All right, well, after the first season shooting in New York, I was anxious to continue my series, but my process is not particularly usable in cold weather. My silver bath needs to be at a temperature of 60 degrees minimum, which meant photographing in the New York winter was only going to happen if I was going to have some kind of, heated van where I was going to set up my dark box. And I didn't have access to that, so I decided to pick up the truck and go to California, except I flew. So it turns out that California has better surf in the winter. And so my assistant and I, we packed up our gear and we headed out to California. So traveling with wet plate is not a new or original idea. Westward development in the United States and the advent of photography ran a parallel course in the 1850s. And a plethora of our photographic forefathers set out to discover new topographies, new worlds, to document the landscape, and also to document wars. And the image on the left is of Nicholas Sparling, who was Roger Fenton's assistant in the Crimea. shot approximately 1860s. And the image on the right is of my assistant Christine on the salt flats of western Utah. Well, I just thought it was kind of an interesting mix of what the wet plate situation looks like from the time it was conceived to now. And then on the side of the van for Nicholas Sparling, it says photographic van. And as you can see, that's pulled by a horse or two. So this dark picture is of me in my dark box, and this is what my setup looks like. And so I wanted to just tell you a little bit about it and describe each thing. So that box in the center with the black cloth over it is the dark box with me in it. The cooler on the bottom left holds my chemistry, my collodion, my silver bath, my developer, and something called a helper tray, and then the regular trays. And you see that little scoop away bucket that has a tray on top of it? All of my refuse water goes in there. There's a bottle of water on the top. What's that? All right, we'll forget that. On the right is a bunch of trays. These are actually shoe boxes on the right from the container store that stack up. And I use those to store each individual plate in with water to keep it covered and wet until the time I get home when I can take home my plates and wash them. So, and then all my camera equipment's on the other side, just to give you an idea of what it all looks like. And these are photographs of a guy that I met in California who also does wet plate photography, and a lot of wet plate photographers are Civil War reenactors, and so this is what his setup looks like. He goes to these reenactments and everybody dresses up in old-fashioned clothing with their old-fashioned cameras, and they sit around and take pictures of each other and also the Civil War battlefields. So I just thought that point of comparison was interesting too. This is a picture of my camera, which you can't see because it's too dark. Okay, so coming to California made finding surfers a little more challenging than Montauk. Mostly when I set out to shoot, I don't know who I'll be photographing, and that leaves a lot to chance and even less to control. So I started out originally, like in Montauk, just by going to beaches where there was some swell and surfers and setting up and hoping that something would happen. So that's kind of like taking a big long trip to go out somewhere and not sure you're gonna come up with any results. And on the West Coast in February, I met a very different sort of surfer than I encountered in New York, and they were not all the warm and sunny kind the Beach Boys sang about. This guy, whose name was Woody, he would hang out in a place called The Pit and drink a lot of beer. And they weren't the friendliest of people, but eventually after spending the whole day there, Woody came over and said, "I want you to take my picture." So I did. My camera and my process were not the same subject of interest like back home, and I found I had to be even more outgoing and engaging and assertive to talk about what I was doing, why I was doing it, and why I thought it was important, and why I thought they should participate. One of the first people I photographed in California just went crazy when I asked him to hold still for the 5 minutes between framing the picture and going back to my dark box, coating my plate and sensitizing it. That takes about 5 minutes. By the time I came back, he thought I was trying to humiliate him by making him stand in this position for 5 minutes. And so when I finally did take the picture, he moved. And it was like, he just went crazy. So that picture didn't happen. This was one of his friends out in Malibu. So on the upside is, I met these other guys in Malibu as well. These were a set of twins that shared their surfboard from Northern California. And they were just really fabulous people and funny and great to talk to and interesting. Met a father and son who were out surfing. That's the Malibu Pier in the background. And then as I headed north to Santa Barbara, I met William on the beach and asked him to pose. And when I explained the details of what was involved with posing, how you had to kind of stand still and how I had to framed the photograph, and it was going to take me about 5 minutes to get back there. He said, "Don't worry, I know." I said, "What do you mean you know?" He said, "I've already posed for a wet plate photographer before." So he was pretty cool, this kid, and he had actually. So my first year in California, I was not unlike a surfer. I traveled up and down the coast in search of a swell. I didn't have a place to stay nearby or the time to return over and over again to the same location to ingratiate myself with people. So my whole experience there was really different. And understanding the limitations and the parameters of this process has taken me actually several years, and it's also been a very humbling experience. Exciting, but humbling. A lot goes wrong with wet plate photography. Is that a better picture of the camera? It's in San Diego. So my second year into California, I decided I needed to prepare a little bit. So I talked to a friend who had a connection at a surf shop in San Diego, and she called this surf shop and called Surf Divas, and they sent out a mass email to all of their people, and I had a bunch of people then waiting to post for me on the beach, which was really great. This was a Hawaiian girl who came out. So that what that meant was that I no longer had to, drive around looking for, there didn't have to be any surf in order for me to photograph a surfer. This is Jessie Janes. She said her father liked puns. Yeah. I fondly call her my anorexic surfer. This is Jonathan with his Japanese wetsuit. And Poppy, surf instructor, came out with her baby and husband. I also had gotten in touch with some people from Surfline who also put out something on the internet just for people to get in touch with me if they were interested in posing. So the woman on the left, her name is Heather Hudson, and I met her on the beach just by chance. And after I had taken her photograph, I was up in the parking lot, and she was up in the parking lot, and we were chatting, and she was telling me that she had started making a film called The Women in the Waves. And she was wondering if there might be some way for us to work together. And so she told me a little bit about her film, which is about women surfers. And the film shows about 5 different decades of women surfers, so girls in their teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on. And she was hoping that what I might be able to do was to do portraits of like the lead people in her film, and they could somehow use these pictures. So I thought, wow, that's a great idea. And I would love to show you this film, if I could. Oh, there it is. It's pretty dark. Can you hear it?
Women and men. Hello. How differently do we do things? Some people it doesn't hit, which amazes me. Like, oh, wow, you tried surfing and you're not still surfing? Which, thank God.
So this film was shown at the New York Surf Film Festival last year, and it's available on DVD. If you want to get into surf films, sounds like you two do. All right, moving on. So, also in my second year into the project, I met a book agent who introduced me to Sean Thompson, the legendary South African surfer. And for this book project that I was working on, in the hopes that if I had famous surfers, we'd be able to sell the book. That book project didn't happen, but I did get to meet Sean Thompson, who was really a lovely person. And it was really nice to meet him, and he is the author of a book called Surfer's Code. And this is the 12 steps to the Surfer's Code. But in Sean's book, he says that there's nothing more honorable than making a living by doing what you love. And I agree with him. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the Surfer's Code. It's 12 simple lessons for riding through life. World champion surfer Sean Thompson shares his life lessons that he's gathered from decades of surfing, from his boyhood adventures in South Africa, to the world tour in the late 1970s, to the business world today. For Thompson, surfing is a hobby, a sport, a religion, an obsession, and more, it's a way of life. Thompson's life lessons have guided his career to the top of both professional competition and the world of business. And now he shares these powerful lessons born on the world's best swells with all people, including those who might never step on the surfboard. These lessons are born of the collective wisdom of the surf community and are a powerful source of inspiration in the face of extraordinary challenges of everyday life. So, another 12. Okay, so codes of conduct and honor. I'm thinking about surfers and photographing them. During the same trip, I met Tom Curran's manager, and this is a photograph of Tom Curran. And his manager contacted me, and Tom is a 3-time world champion surfer, and his manager suggested adding him to my series. Unfortunately, Tom does not make his own arrangements, and he never dealt directly with me. So when I finally did get to meet him and talk with him, he was really awkward. And having a direct connection with each person had been the foundation of the series so far. He asked to photograph each of his sons first, and then they too were not particularly willing subjects. And then after I was exhausted and felt really manipulated after doing that, Tom shows up for his picture. And I had to do 3 separate shots of him. He could not hold still for any of the shots. They're all blurry. And I think that they all are kind of failures. What I realized after doing this, that this was not a way of working that I was really interested in doing, and it was not a situation I was comfortable with at all. I felt that the integrity of the shoot itself became compromised, and it lost the organic beauty of it being about me and another person and recording that interaction with the camera. So this was a lesson learned. But that didn't mean that I didn't hone in on having my picture taken with both Tom and Sean and these 2 sisters called the Ming sisters. And that's their photograph. You know, the work I'm doing is meant to be intuitive, it's meant to be natural, and in this instance with Tom, it felt all unnatural. But the very same manager was the guy who managed Tom was also a really nice guy, and this past year he introduced me to a few younger pros who were out there, and they were a lot more easy to work with and a lot more interested in working with me. So this is one guy named Nick, another kid named Caden, and Lakey Peterson, who is sponsored by Patagonia. These 2 twins, and Corey. So, working with a direct positive means that the size film and plate that you see is the same size as your finished product. So the desire to go bigger is really tempting. And over the past year, I've worked with another wet plate photographer making 14 by 17 tintypes. All the ones you've seen so far have been 8 by 10. Oh, but hang on. What I forgot to tell you about, the best part about photographing surfers are the gifts. This was a gift given to me. This is a wooden trophy from the Rincon Classic where it's written on the back, to Joni, we love your soulful surf photographs. We love your soulful art from the Rincon family. And then a painting. It was a gift by another surfer. And these are some pictures that were taken of me by a photographer out in California named Chris Orwig. I photographed him, and while he was waiting for his picture to be taken, he spent a long time photographing me and all my stuff. So this is a Japanese tourist who is waiting to have his picture taken. And there's the picture I took of him. This is the plate of Chris Orwig. And he also did an audio interview with me later on, which is on his blog. And just some pictures of some of the stuff that I work with. So, 14 by 17 tintypes. So you can imagine an 8 by 10 camera is about this big, which means a 14 by 17 camera is about this big. So the bigger you go, the bigger your image, but it means more stuff you have, and the harder it is to work with it. So I thought I'd just show you a few pictures from this past year when I worked with a friend making these 14, 17 tintypes. This is the board of actually a famous skateboarder named Andy Kessler. He was also a surfer, and he died suddenly last summer from anaphylactic shock. He got a bee sting on the beach, wasn't able to get any medical attention right away, and he passed away. And this is his board that his friends would bring to the beach in order to commemorate and honor his memory. All right, well, when Paula asked me to come up here and talk with all of you, I thought about you all, who you might be, and the fact that you are probably pretty serious about art or photography, and you're thinking about the direction you might want to go in. So, showing you pictures of what I do now is good. I think that's all really great. But I thought it might be more insightful for you if you could see the kind of pictures I made when I was closer to your age. I thought you might be able to get a connection to what I'm doing now, or not. Maybe you won't be able to make the connection, but at least you'll have a point of comparison to see what I did all these years ago, and if it does relate to what I'm doing now and what you might be thinking about doing. So, back at SVA, I didn't really know what I wanted to photograph. I knew I wanted to photograph. That's one thing I knew. These were all made in the 1970s. First, let me just say New York City. And at that time, I was taking my camera with me everywhere. I was wearing it like a second skin. I wore it around my neck, and in the winter, I just put my coat on top of it. And I thought the subway was a great place to shoot because it's a place where a lot of people gather. In a way, it's a lot like the beach. You just go, people are always going to be there, your subjects are always going to be there, you just have to look for them, right? So in that way, there is that similarity between what I did and what I do. But the difference is that in the 1970s, New York City was not the nice, friendly place it is now, where people stopped for people crossing the street. Then they ran you over. Then they were hostile. Then they threatened to kill you if you took their picture. So it was a little different photographing in the subways then. And then the other thing is, it was illegal, so you had to be really careful. I didn't really know then what I was looking for. But when I found it, I photographed it. Gosh, can you see it all? I'm sorry it's so dark. My subject matter was mostly families, kids, people clutching one another, people looking alone and frightened, or just glazed over. This particular picture, I came down the stairs in the back. I don't know if you can see them behind that woman. There's some stairs, and I came down the stairs, and I saw this woman's white head aglow in the subway light, and I just stood there saying, oh my God, this is a great picture, this is a great picture. I'll just wait for her to turn around. And I waited, and I waited, and she didn't turn around. And then I realized I have to go around and go in front of her to take the picture. So all of these pictures were pretty much shot with a Leica 35mm camera, a 35mm or 25mm lens, pretty wide-angle lenses where I preset my focus. Some of them were shot looking through the viewfinder, but many of them were shot at waist level or standing up, just holding onto the subway, pressing the shutter. And that's the last one. That's two girls with their bare backs on the left, and a girl on the right. End. So, yeah, I'd love to answer some questions if you guys have some. Yeah?
So for your subway pictures, how did you approach the people you were photographing? Did you tell them you were taking a picture, or did you just take it?
I never ask people to take their picture. It's completely the opposite of what I do now. What I do now is I get so much cooperation from people, but then I wasn't interested in having people posing. I was interested in what I saw. And so to do that, I wasn't able to ask people to take their picture. Yeah?
The collodion process is not, you can't use any kind of flash, even though that flash is daylight balance, it has to be pure ultraviolet light.
You can use strobe with it, but you have to use multiple pops because the type of light it emits isn't strong enough with one pop. Yeah, maybe that's it. I don't know. I've never actually worked with strobe. When I work with lights, I work with fluorescent lights. And the lights are very close to the subject because the further away they are, the more the light falls off. The images, well, you know what a positive is? It's an underexposed negative with a black background. Right. So if I were to make negatives of the same subject, I could, but my exposure time would be twice as long. So you can see why I opted for the positive, because it was long enough with a 1 to 3 second exposure. Do you guys feel like you have an understanding of wet plate collodion that you didn't maybe have before? Wouldn't you like to all try it sometime? That's the right answer. Yeah.
So when you talk about the positive being one image or one time,
A one-shot deal?
One-shot deal. Do you exhibit print or do you exhibit some representation of that
Plate?
or do you exhibit the plate?
At the Peabody Essex Museum, I only exhibited the plates. I do scan the plates, and sometimes I make some prints from them, but they're all digital prints, and they don't really look like the plates. The plates have an object quality, and actually I brought some to show you guys, that it's unlike a print. You can't really recreate on paper what's on this piece of metal. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't feel the same. Any other questions?
Can we see those tintypes you brought?
Yeah, come on up here. I'll only ask that you let me handle them, but yeah, come on up. Yeah.